At sunrise, the Colosseum seemed almost peaceful. Its towering arches glowed golden in the first light, as if Rome itself was blessing the day. But beneath that beauty lay something far darker. Yesterday's blood still clung to the stones, dried into a deep maroon stain. The sand of the arena, churned by bodies and hooves, looked like a battlefield more than a stage. Vendors were already gathering at the gates, their baskets heavy with olives, bread, and watered wine, eager to sell to the tens of thousands soon to arrive. Down in the hippodrome, the tunnels beneath the floor, handlers shouted as they prodded half-starved lions into cages. Elephants stomped nervously, their chains rattling like drums. Panthers hissed in the shadows. Blacksmiths hammered steel against anvils, sharpening the swords that would soon draw blood. This was not simply sport, it was Rome's greatest theater, a stage where cruelty was art and death was entertainment. For the Roman people, nothing else united them so completely. Not temples, not politics, not even war. The games were where the empire itself revealed its power, but the story of the Colosseum, and the blood it demanded, began centuries before the first stone was laid. In 264 BC, in a simple cattle market rather than a grand amphitheater, the first gladiatorial combat was staged. It was not meant as entertainment. It was a funeral ritual. The sons of a Roman nobleman, Junius Brutus Pera, decided that the proper way to honor their father was not through prayer or statues, but through blood. 6 slaves were forced to fight to the death in front of the mourners. 3 pairs clashed, their blood soaking the dirt. The Romans believed this act honored the dead by giving them companions in the afterlife. At first, these brutal displays were rare, but the people who witnessed them felt something powerful, something both horrifying and mesmerizing. And Rome, a city always hungry for control, realized that blood could be used as more than ritual. It could be used as spectacle. Over the next century, funerary games spread. Noble families began to compete with one another, trying to stage the most elaborate combats. To host such games was to prove wealth, piety, and dominance. For the elites, bloodshed became politics. For the crowd, it became expectation. By the late Republic, gladiator games had escaped the funerals entirely and moved into the public sphere. They became tools of influence. Politicians seeking office hosted games to win votes. Generals celebrated victories with bloodshed in the arena. Death was no longer about the gods or the dead. It was about the people and about control. The more Rome grew, the more extravagant its games became. The beasts came next. Lions from North Africa, crocodiles from the Nile, leopards from Asia Minor, even giraffes marched across deserts to die in Rome. Each animal was a symbol of conquest, proof that no corner of the world was beyond Roman reach. Julius Caesar himself, eager to dazzle the people, once displayed a giraffe, the first Rome had ever seen, only to have it torn apart in front of cheering crowds. The introduction of beasts transformed the arena. No longer just man against man, but man against nature itself. Starved lions, weakened by days of neglect, were released to tear apart condemned prisoners. Packs of leopards were driven into terrified crowds of captives who were given only wooden sticks to defend themselves. Titus, at the opening of the Colosseum in AD 80, staged one of the bloodiest spectacles in history. For 100 straight days, the arena ran with blood. 9,000 animals were slaughtered. Tigers lunged at gladiators. Bears clawed at their chains until finally speared by soldiers. The crowd roared with every kill, their voices rising like thunder. The Colosseum itself was Rome's masterpiece of cruelty. Built on the site of Nero's former palace, it was a gift to the people, a promise that emperors cared for their entertainment. It could hold 50,000 spectators, rising high above the city. The architecture was genius, with tunnels, elevators, and trapdoors that allowed beasts, gladiators, and even entire forests to appear on command. The floor could be flooded to stage mock naval battles, with real ships clashing in bloody chaos. Every feature of the Colosseum was designed to surprise, to shock, to remind the audience that Rome's power had no limit. But behind the beauty of the arches and the chants of the crowd lay unimaginable suffering. Gladiators, often prisoners of war, criminals, or slaves, lived in barracks like cattle. They were trained to fight, to die well, and to entertain. Some became heroes, admired by the crowd, but most were nameless bodies buried in shallow graves. Even when they won, their survival depended on the whim of the crowd and the emperor. A defeated gladiator would raise his finger, begging for mercy. The crowd decided his fate with a gesture, thumbs up for life, thumbs down for death. And death was not always quick. Gladiators with wooden swords were thrown against seasoned killers, mocked before being butchered. Others fought in strange mismatched battles, one with a net and trident, the other with a short sword and curved helmet designed to frustrate every attack. Sometimes whole armies of captives were forced into the arena, reenacting famous battles until their bodies piled high. Even women were thrown into combat, fighting as gladiatrices, jeered at by the men who watched. Rome spared no one. For the emperors, the arena was not simply entertainment. It was propaganda. Bread and circuses, as the poet Juvenal once wrote, were the tools of control. Feed the people, entertain them, and they will forget everything else. The Colosseum became a place where emperors proved their generosity, their power, and their dominance over life and death. Every roar of the crowd was loyalty. Every death on the sand was authority made visible. Yet the games also revealed the empire's hunger for cruelty. And this hunger only grew. By midday, when the crowd's excitement began to fade, the most horrifying spectacles began. These were not gladiator fights or animal hunts. They were executions staged as theater. The Romans called it damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Criminals, rebels, and prisoners of war were brought into the arena with no chance of survival. But instead of quick deaths, they were forced to act out myths from Rome's stories. Orpheus, the legendary musician, was once portrayed by a prisoner who strummed a lyre in the sand. Animals, trained to attack, were released, and a bear mauled him mid-performance. Prometheus, who in myth was chained to a rock and had his liver eaten daily by an eagle, was reenacted in the arena with a man bound to the sand while vultures tore at his flesh. Every tale ended the same way, with blood. Some executions were designed to be sheer terror. Prisoners were dressed in clothes soaked in pitch and set alight, burning like human torches as the crowd cheered. Others were crucified inside the arena while children laughed and vendors sold wine. There was no boundary between punishment and entertainment. Rome blurred the two until cruelty became joy. The madness reached its peak when emperors themselves joined the stage. Caligula, infamous for his cruelty, once ran out of animals during a show. Rather than end the spectacle, he ordered spectators dragged from the audience and thrown into the arena to be slaughtered. Nero, obsessed with theater, forced prisoners to die in performances that mirrored his favorite plays, blurring art and death into one. Commodus, perhaps the most infamous of all, fancied himself Hercules reborn. He entered the arena dressed in lion skins, killing chained animals with arrows and spears. He forced the crowd to cheer, executing opponents in staged battles while the empire groaned under his vanity. Not all Romans were blind to the horror. Philosophers like Seneca condemned the games, arguing that watching them turned men into beasts themselves. Cicero admitted the people demanded such entertainment, but criticized the cruelty as pointless. The Christians, who became frequent victims in the arena, saw it as the ultimate symbol of Rome's corruption. Stories spread of believers singing hymns as lions devoured them, their faith stronger than Rome's cruelty. But the crowd kept coming. For centuries, the Colosseum thundered with their voices. Emperors bankrupted themselves to outdo one another, staging larger, bloodier games. Citizens became addicted, demanding more bread, more circuses, more blood. Rome's discipline, the strength that built an empire, began to erode. The games revealed Rome's greatness but also its decay. By the 4th century, cracks appeared. Christianity, now spreading across the empire, opposed the games. Leaders began to see the cost, not just in lives but in coin. Staging games drained the treasury. The empire, weakened by invasion and corruption, could no longer afford endless blood. Finally, in the 5th century, the games ceased. The Colosseum, once filled with roars and screams, stood silent. Its arches crumbled, its tunnels filled with earth. Yet even in ruin, it remained a symbol of what Rome had been, and what it had lost. Today, millions walk through those ruins. They admire the architecture, the scale, the brilliance of Roman engineering, but the stones whisper darker truths. The grooves on the floor mark where cages once rose. The tunnels beneath echo with the cries of men and beasts. The sand, now gone, once soaked up oceans of blood. The Colosseum is not simply a monument. It is a warning. It tells us that a civilization that glorifies cruelty cannot endure, that power built on suffering is doomed to collapse. Rome believed death was entertainment, that suffering was loyalty, that control was eternal. But history proved otherwise. The ruins remind us of a truth as sharp as any gladiator's sword. Cruelty may build an empire, but it cannot sustain one. The Colosseum still stands, not as a celebration of Rome's glory, but as a shadow of its darkest obsession. Walk beneath its arches, and you may still feel it. The roar of the crowd, the clash of swords, the cry of a lion, the silence of the dead. Rome is gone, but its darkness lingers.